Good evening all and welcome. A Merry Christmas to you all. I am joined tonight by my good friend Killer Orange Cat for this Christmas special. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This happened when I was 13. For context, I'm a girl, and in the 8th grade, and the middle school I went to was about a 15-minute walk away, so not very far. My older brother and I grew up in East LA, and both the front and back doors had a black metal screen and a wooden door. During the day, we would always leave the wooden door open and have the black metal door closed and locked. Except this day. That day, I came home from school and had about an hour before anyone else would be home. I was really thirsty, so I rushed inside and grabbed a drink and sat down at the kitchen table, which was about 10 feet away from the front door. I heard the metal gate open and was surprised, as no one should have been coming home that early. I got up to see who it was, and I saw an older man in his 60s. He had short white hair and a long white beard. He was wearing an AC/DC t-shirt, torn jeans and sunglasses. I remember thinking that he looked a lot like a dirty and creepy Santa Claus. He knocked on the metal screen door and asked if my parents were home. I was a dumb kid and said they weren't. He got a smile on his face and said that he collected donations for needy children. I said I was sorry and that I didn't have any money. He said sometimes children donated old toys. I said I didn't have any to donate. He insisted that I must have some toys I didn't want anymore, and he was beginning to creep me out, and I noticed I hadn't locked the door when I came inside. I tried to keep my cool as I slowly and very carefully locked the door. I kept him talking so he wouldn't notice. A minute or two later he wouldn't leave, so I decided I would pretend to check for toys and then say I didn't have any so he would hopefully go. I told him I would go check, and as I turned and took a few steps down the hall, I clearly heard him yank at the door in an attempt to open it. I didn't want him to know that I had heard this, so I kept walking down the hall and into a room. I didn't have a cell phone, and the only phone in the house was in the kitchen. I thought about what to do and decided to stick with my plan. After 2 or 3 minutes, I walked out hoping he had left. Nope, creepy Santa was still there. I apologized and said I didn't find anything. He sighed and said he would check in another time. He left and walked across the street. I watched from the kitchen window, peeking through the blinds as he just stood there staring at my house for 45 minutes. My brother and a few of his friends finally came walking down the street. As my brother came inside and his friends kept walking down the street, the man walked around the corner and disappeared. I told my brother what happened, and he walked outside to look. But the creepy Santa was gone. When my mum came home, we told her what happened, and she called the police. They said to call back if he ever returned. Thankfully, he never did. And I learned to triple check that I had locked the door from then on out. It was the evening on Christmas Day, 2012. I'm around 16, and my mum and I are driving back after spending Christmas Day with our extended family in Greater London. Me and my mum live alone with our dog Pika. We are just chatting away about Christmas, then the conversation moved to Santa Claus, and then we started talking about other mythical holiday characters like the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny. We spoke for a while about how when I was young, my mum used to keep my baby teeth in a small jar with a blue fairy on the top. I always remembered the jar from my childhood, but hadn't seen it in many years. I remember that last time I'd seen it, it was partially wrapped in black duct tape, obviously to stop it from falling open, and if I had to estimate when this was, I had to say at least several years prior. Probably around the time we moved house in 2007. We spoke for a while about baby teeth and this jar. My mum also stating she hadn't seen it in a long time, and hoped that it wasn't lost during the process of moving house. I remember even saying that I thought it was a bit gross that my mum had kept all my teeth in there in the first place, and that they're just sitting in the house somewhere. This conversation went on for a while, and then we moved on to talking about something else. We arrived home shortly after, walked in the front door, and greeted my dog as usual. My mum walks into the kitchen, and I follow immediately behind her. And there on the floor of the kitchen is the small jar, unopened in 2 pieces, and all these tiny baby teeth over the floor. My first reaction was to think that my mum was trying to spook me, although she had literally never played a prank on me in my whole life. Then I saw her face and realized she definitely wasn't. She starts freaking out and starts ringing everyone she knows to tell them what happened. My dog Pika was also pretty old at that point, at least 11, and was very docile when we left the house. She wouldn't go rummaging through our belongings or anything like that. It really wouldn't be possible. Anyway, as most stuff is kept in drawers and cupboards, she wouldn't have access. Weird, right? We still don't have an explanation for it. Christmas Eve dinner at Burger King. Sounds innocent enough, right? Not my first choice, but I had to work late, and being Christmas Eve, it looked like my best choice. I got finished work at 9 and had some coupons for Burger King, so made my decision. When I got there, I noticed it was still open, but the dining room was shut. The only way I could get something is if I went through the drive-thru. Only problem was I didn't have a car. I tried to walk up to the drive-thru and place my order, but the compassionate young lady working there wasn't having it. She told me if I didn't have a vehicle, I couldn't use drive-thru. I became rather aggravated and began saying things I'm not proud of. At that moment, an older woman wearing shining armor appeared on the scene and offered me to jump into her car and order my food. At first, I turned around, not wanting to be a bother, but after some convincing, decided to accept her help. After ordering my food, and it took so long to get that I missed my bus and got upset, the nice woman offered me a ride home. I kind of felt off by the offer and declined. She was persistent, but at the same time nice, and convinced me to take her up on the offer. Mind you, I'm a 250-pound 30-something-year-old man, so I don't really feel threatened by a 50-year-old woman. If the circumstances were different, I would not have taken the ride. After I told her where I lived, we proceeded home. About 5 minutes from my house, she made a wrong turn. I explained that I lived the other way and that we needed to turn around or let me out here, and I would walk the rest of the way. It was then that the woman's demeanor changed, and she told me that she could not let me spend Christmas Eve alone, and she was going to take me to her house. I told her that I needed to get home immediately to let my dog out, and that it would be fine. The woman then tried to entice me with cocaine and liquor at her place, but since I'm in recovery, I told her I wasn't interested. She refused to turn around or let me out, and started driving, not stopping at any stop signs. I'm not gonna lie, my mind was racing and I began to sweat. I knew that I could physically overpower her, but what awaited me at her house? I also felt bad about hurting her after her kindness, but I had to get away before her house and didn't know where that was, so I didn't know how much time I had. Then all of a sudden, luckily, the car in front was stopped at a stop sign, and across from it, another was stopped also. She had to slow down to almost to a stop at this point, which is where I made my break for it. I jumped out of the car, still moving, leaving my food in there as I took off running. As I was running, she stopped and got out of a car and began trying to talk me into getting back with her. That wasn't an option. I didn't know what her motives were or who she was, but I knew I wasn't willing to risk my life over it. I ran all the way home and made sure I wasn't followed. What would have happened to me if I was 2 years younger or still doing drugs and drinking? Her offer of cocaine and booze would have probably worked. Kidnapping, murder, sex traffic, organ trade, Being a man, the thought of the vulnerability most women face every day was so foreign to me. I now understand the fear most women have to go through. I really feel like this nice woman had a nefarious purpose, and that I happened to be the perfect victim of opportunity. Any thoughts would be appreciated. I never went to the cops because I felt they may not believe me, or may look down for me being scared. Should I place a police report? What if, by me not placing a report, this ends up to someone else? Or am I just jumping to conclusions?
So I was organizing some stuff in storage on Christmas night because I was planning to move out around New Year's. I share a storage unit with my mom and dad in a kind of sketchy area of town, but a part of town I knew nonetheless. All of my stuff was in the back of the unit, so I had to do a lot of lifting and moving. It was getting dark and I was the only one left in the storage lot. Our unit is on the outside lot. As I was taking stuff out and getting it ready for the move the next few days, I see a man come out of the inner storage lot inside the building. I kinda got a sketchy vibe from the dude, but he seemed homeless, so I said happy holidays as he asked to help, but insisted I can do this on my own. He then left and I continued moving stuff back into storage. There was a lot of shit that I had to move, so I knew I needed to hurry. The guy then shows up again and approaches me closer and he goes, "You sure you don't need help?" I said, "I'm good, but thank you." Then he goes, "Look, I need help moving stuff into my storage. Can you open the door for me to the inner lot?" At that moment, I knew something wasn't right. I then declined, saying I needed to get home as it was important, to which he said, "I think what I need to do is more important." My anxiety started kicking in hardcore. I had no idea what to do. I finished packing my stuff and clutching my keys to the car to get out. I locked my storage unit and then struck up a conversation. Tried to keep my cool because I had no idea if this man had a gun or knife on him. So I said I would help him, but had a plan to start running instead. I had my phone ready and made sure he stayed ahead of me. I then told a fib that my mother was sick and today was a hard day, to which the guy started to be more friendly and nice. He then stops before we get to the door and goes, "Actually, I don't need your help." At that moment I knew I used my wit to its advantage. He felt empathy and I started walking away. He then asked for a ride and I said I couldn't do that. I started walking faster and he followed me and said, "Please," then asked why I looked so stressed and worried. I then got into my car and he started knocking on my window. I rolled it down and said, "Happy holidays," then drove my ass to the gate that I had to enter a code into and got out of there. I knew that he was going to mug me or rob me, or possibly worse. All I know is I'm investing in some self-defense weapons, as that was the most terrifying thing in my life.
I'm a 22-year-old male and live in a large city in the Midwest. I drive Lyft while putting myself through trade school. I drive for other similar companies, but that's besides the point. I have many horror stories to share. Let me take you back to Christmas Eve 2020. I was out running Lyft for a few hours before heading to my mum's with my new baby and wife. Nothing special going on for the night, just the usual. I get a ride request. I was picking up from this kind of low-income apartment complex, no big deal. I arrive, I find my passenger. He has all his belongings, several boxes of stuff. Now my car is a 2006 Chevy Impala. It's not too big. We get all of his stuff loaded up, barely, and are on our way out. During the ride, he's crying, saying his girlfriend was cheating on him, and he had to walk in on them earlier that night. He couldn't stay there because it was in her name on the lease, so I was taking him to a hotel. Now in my city, we have a street that is well known for having vices, hookers, drugs, gangs, weapons, and shady motels, the works. We get to the motel. He asks me to wait for him to check in and get his keys. No problem, man, I say. I confess I break the rules a little when coming to lift. I have a gun hidden in a concealed holster, secured to the underside of my driver's seat for protection. Reason being, driving Lyft and other contract apps, I've had knives and guns pulled on me, as well as people try to fight me, rob me, and all kinds of things, but like I said, stories for another time. The motel was on a street that I mentioned before. Homeless people were everywhere, and there was a dude on the far corner of the complex that still had a needle in his arm passed out against the building. I'm a big fan of true crime and am a bit on edge. He gets his key. The whole motel is ground level. So to help the guy out, I drive to his door. As I mentioned before, he had a lot of stuff, so I began helping him unload. While on my second trip of getting stuff, I saw the guy come out of a room just to the south of my car, followed by two ladies. They came up to the room I was next to, not my passenger's one, and one of the ladies pounded the door, then opened it. That's when I see the guy raise a shotgun out of his long coat and storm into the room. The two ladies followed him, slamming the door behind. Following, I heard a lot of yelling and shouting. I was just waiting for shots to ring out. When out of nowhere, the passenger came up from behind me. "I can take this, man. Go ahead and take off. Have a Merry Christmas." And he gave me a cash tip. I didn't even notice he took the boxes out of my hand or slid a $5 bill into my pocket. I was frozen. I knew what may have been going down in that room, but I had to leave, or at least get out of there where I could have my gun closer. I knew the guy and both ladies saw me, and I knew they knew I saw the gun. I had to leave. No witnesses. I got into my car and sped away quickly. I got a block or so away and called the cops. I give them every detail, and after I got off the phone with the police, I signed out of Lyft. I hadn't made much money, but I was done. I got a call later that night. The cops investigated. They never found the gunman or the women. They never answered the door. I saw them come out, and the occupants of the room they went into. They said nothing happened, and that I was full of crap. Well, I knew what I saw. I'm going to tell you that my apartment is haunted. To the extent that I've had paranormal investigators come for a visit and cleansed it, and it all seemed to die down. But after their visit, just before Christmas, activity exploded, with doors slamming open in my apartment, me hearing voices, running footsteps, faucets turning on and off by themselves, even my dog getting pet sometimes, and what looked like slapped on others. I've also heard as clear as day a voice memo of my friend sitting on the couch. On Saturday, while I was using the bathroom, it sounded like someone broke into my apartment. I still have Christmas decorations up, and the jingle bells on my front door went ballistic like someone slung the door open and shut it. Even though I never heard the door move, it was locked. It was around 1:30 a.m. I live alone with my dog and kitten, who were hissing and snarling, like someone they hated walked in. I must stress, my kitten and dog are very loving towards each other and don't fight. I'm 5'1" and about 110 pounds. I'm not big, but try to make myself as mean as possible, and I ran out of the bathroom with one of my little pocket tasers. What I saw when I exited the bathroom was shocking, to say the least. The heavy tray full of random things on my coffee table was now on the floor. Mind you, the only sound I'd ever heard before this were booming footsteps, not something that I have trouble picking up sometimes laying on the ground. All the cabinets on my side table and coffee table were open. I think the scariest part were my bar stools, which was still when I passed them, but as I checked the still locked doors, I heard my cat hissing from behind me, and then both of my bar stools were spinning, one clockwise, the other counterclockwise. Then I heard something grunt in my ear. Mentally, I tried to reason that my boyfriend had come over and was messing with me, until I realized he was at his place, more than likely asleep, and doesn't even have a key. I was holding my little taser and hit the trigger and jammed it backwards, hoping to hit whatever was behind me, but there was no sound or anything. No one behind me. I then called my boyfriend Shaken, not really wanting to talk about it when he asked. But today, things picked up more. See, I work the night shift, therefore I sleep during the day. I was showering this morning, as I live alone with my kitten and dog. The kitten was in the shower with me because he's a weirdo, and my dog was curled up on the mat next to the toilet. I turned around to reach for the soap, and it was like someone was standing in the bathroom, pushing their arm through the shower curtain to touch me. I slapped it, not really knowing what to do. I think it made it mad. The curtain flung open and all the hooks came off the shower rod, and the whole thing hit the ground. My dog, who is normally tame and a big scaredy cat, completely started growling and ran out the room. I decided my hair didn't need to be washed and ran out the room also, completely forgetting my towel. At this point I was standing in the living room, sopping wet, my dog crying in the kitchen on the couch while I slowly spin around. It was like my apartment was alive. Everything seemed to be moving. The bar stools, the Polaroid camera on the coffee table, even the leashes hanging by the hooks on the door were swaying. As fast as it happened, it all stopped. It was quiet for a moment until my pet's food container flipped over the kitchen, and the water faucets in the bathroom and kitchen turned on full blast. I'd like to note that my kitten had learned how to turn them on, so he could sit under the water, which I began to blame him, until I felt him walk up and start licking the water off my legs. I felt like crying at this point. This horrible, gut-wrenching feeling filled me up, like something that felt worse than anything I've ever felt before. That's when I decided I had to start putting on random clothes that I left hanging over my bar stool, and as I was putting my pants on, I noticed extremely thick hair wasn't hanging over my head like it should be. When I decided I had to go, I started putting on random clothes that I left hanging over the bar stool, and as I was putting on my pants, I noticed my extremely thick hair wasn't hanging over my head like it should be. When I'm pulling my still wet body through leggings, a few strands were lifted like someone was holding them away from my face. I screamed and ran outside, holding my kitten and my very large dog in my arms. I could hear what sounded like growling as I closed the door. I sat in my car for about an hour and a half before I went back inside and put my dog in his kennel, in which I shut both latches, and this time I actually left. I was gone for an hour due to an errand I had to run, and when I opened my front door, my dog jumped on me. Mind you, I locked him up in his cage. His collar was off, unclipped, and he seemed happy enough. The cat bed and blanket that stay on top of it were also on the floor, and the kennel door was still locked. I was in shock. My dog is a big boy, very muscular, and this escape trick has only happened twice before. Once when I first got him, and today being the second. The entire apartment was cold, and truthfully, I felt like I've tried everything to try and protect myself and my pets. I pray every day, have saged my apartment, and I've had a paranormal team that came 3 times, but nothing can be helped. But even with all of that, plus the previous stuff, I have yet to share the horrors that I've had to go through in my bedroom, but that will be for another time. If anyone could offer me advice on what the hell is happening to me, I would love to hear it.
Apart from specters appearing at random intervals, the most chilling was the night before Christmas. For background, the spirit in our home had proved to be very possessive of me, and kept attempting to keep me from my boyfriend and win my attention, or maybe my affection. Every night when he would be working into the wee hours, I fell asleep in our room, with their bedroom door unlocked to grant him easy access. Every night when he got home, it was firmly locked. I heard him calling for me in other rooms while showering, and would emerge to find the house always empty and the boyfriend at the gas station or in the backyard. It would sit next to me on the bed, appear to me while bathing, rap on the wall when I was alone, always after my attention. My then boyfriend was deployed, and I was just starting on a glass of wine, settling onto the living room couch. We had decorated right before he left, but I was lonely and hadn't heard from him in a day or two. A few tears slipped in. I heard a sound. No branch had moved. There was no breeze or fan, but a glass ball had gently dropped from the tree onto the wood floor without breaking. I stared at it. It had stayed in place for a second under the tree. Then it slowly rolled 4 feet in my direction, over the lip of the thick, heavy rug, which shouldn't have been possible, and stopped directly in front of my feet. The first of many gifts to cheer me up. I received a vintage children's card, a queen of spades with torn edges and yellowed paper shortly after. I don't know where it came from. It appeared one day, and when I would throw it out, it would appear somewhere else. The garage, the windowsill, under the bed. One time my boyfriend threw it out, as if in angry retaliation, when I was in the bath that evening. The spirit of a woman sat on my chest, pressing me into the water. I couldn't move. It was like a night terror, but with risk of drowning. She had such a twisted, hateful face. After a moment of clawing at the sides of the tub, I was released. We sold the house earlier this year and moved across the country. We found out that the previous owner had been a depressed, manic hoarder who kept animals she seemingly abused in her home. I don't know what happened to her, but if it's guaranteed, but the spirit that dwelled there was the unhappiest thing I'd ever encountered. I almost feel sorry for it.
This story happened a few years ago. My sister and I were the only witnesses to what I'm about to share with you. It's 2017. I live in Florida. It's nice. The weather could be cooler, but it's nice. It was going to be 2018 soon. December had just started, and I remember not feeling that Christmas spirit like I've always done in the past. This was because I was missing my grandma, who left life last year during the holiday season, December 30th, 2016. My family and I lived in New York for 12 years before deciding to finally pull the cord and move to the south to be closer to the other parts of my family, especially on my father's side. We moved in September, and Grandma went into the hospital on December 2nd. They induced her into a medical coma in which she never fully woke from, and although we visited her every day, I truly feel like I never got a chance to say goodbye. You see, we were extremely close. Both her and my grandfather practically raised me and my sister, as my parents worked long hours. My parents had a feeling that my grandmother wouldn't make the night, and so on that particular night I remember saying hello and goodbye to her before my uncle picked both me and my sister up for a New Year's Eve party to help clear our minds. I found out next morning that she passed a few minutes after we left in my parents' arms, and that the feeling they both shared was indeed correct, and we were thankful that us kids didn't have to witness seeing her take her final breaths. I always wished that I knew, because there was just so much to say to her, and I'm left with guilt all these years later for just rushing out like that the night she passed. She was there for what felt like such a long time. It almost became a normal routine at that point. I believed she was getting better, not worse. Dad said that she's peacefully passed, and after seeing her 2 grandchildren one last time, she could finally rest. We were staying in our dad's mum's house, my other grandma, while all of this was going on. We successfully bought a new house and moved in somewhere in February. But this other part of the story still takes place in December. She never did see the new house we bought, but I always knew she was with me in life, even without those words of wisdom. I have a few other stories of things to back up this conclusion. Like my Spotify would randomly turn on her favorite song of all time, Chances Are by Johnny Mathis, without me ever listening to it on my own, or how that butterflies seemingly appear every time I thought of her. These little occurrences, in a way, kept me sane, because I knew it was her saying hello. So it was safe to say that I was a complete wreck without her in my life. As I continued on, it was early December, and one night I was laying in my bed, about ready to fall asleep. It was late. I'd say about 2:30 a.m. if I remember correctly, and I'd just put my phone down to charge, and covers pulled tightly around myself. Me and my sister are inseparable, and being in a middle-class family, we couldn't afford to have some big, beautiful home. The home we bought was a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, and that's all we needed. Needless to say, we shared a room. 2 twin beds on each side of the room. A good 10 minutes of silence goes by as she puts her things down and tries to get some rest. As we shifted in bed and tried to get more comfortable, this ear-piercing noise shot through the room, making the two of us bolt up in our beds like the freaking Shining twins at the same time. It sounded like a very loud crash, and honestly the first thing that came to mind was that we were in the midst of a robbery. Maybe a window had smashed? My 14-year-old brain had a lot of thoughts running back and forth. My first instinct though was to protect my little sister, who was as shaken up as me. Now I loved horror movies from a young age, watched all the paranormal shows on the market for my entertainment, and loved things like games or stories labeled as scary. Of course, when I heard that crash, one of the 20 scenarios in my head immediately went to ghosts. I said it more for my own amusement in the dark situation, but I was terrified. After I calmed my sister down, I volunteered myself to go check the house, even if I didn't want to, because again, the protective older sister's gotta do what she gotta do, and I wanted to make sure things were alright. She hesitated, staying alone in a dark room, so at the end of the day we both decided to walk together and survey what the crashing noise was. It was so loud it honestly amazes me when I think back to it, because the only way to describe the noise was almost like a loud gunfire. It didn't take the two of us long to see what the source of the crash was. Our front door was almost connected to the hallway of bedrooms, so as we left our room, we could completely see the front door and the picture frame leaning against the wall. The both of us walked up to the picture frame, almost baffled at its placement. We went to the bed, and sure enough, the picture was hanging up like normal by the door, like the last several months of doing so too. Now it was leaning on the wall. First thing I checked for a screw on the ground, because it could have easily just fallen onto the ground with the house changes and whatnot, but no, the screw was still shown to be tightly in place on the wall. The picture hung from a metal wire, and my next thought was the wire must have snapped. I carefully leaned the picture forwards and could easily see the wire was still intact with no damage in the slightest. I picked it up from the metal wire to check if it could support weight, and it definitely could. It wasn't even cracked. It was as if someone carefully removed the picture from the wall and then just let it lean on the wall instead. This didn't explain the loud crash noise either, because there was no explanation for the loud sound with no damage. As the two of us chatted on regarding possibilities, we quickly turned to face the Christmas tree, which started to play music. A few days prior, my mum bought 2 motion-activated ornaments from some type of hobby store. We all hated them because every time someone, including our dog, walked by the tree, we'd get an off-tune version of We Wish You a Merry Christmas played for a minute straight. We kept our tree on overnight sometimes, as it was nice to sparkle through the window, and the ornaments going off wouldn't have been normal, if not for the fact we were a good 6 feet away from turning on those ornaments. My family dog was also asleep in my parents' room, so there was no way to attribute blame to her. These 2 oddities were creepy enough, but what made it worse were the ornaments song being all scratchy and drawn out. They had new batteries from the store, and there was no way they ran out of juice in just 2 days. And even if they did, could they both die like that? At the same time, playing like that for the first time in the night? And until we took them down in January, we didn't sleep much. We instead went to our rooms and stayed closed. With no explanation to anything, we waited until our parents woke up. We told them about what happened that night, and the two of us were completely astonished. They didn't hear a loud crash, nor did Grandpa, who slept closer to the door than we. Still didn't have an explanation for what happened that night. Dad put the picture back up, and nothing weird ever happened for the rest of my time there. Me, my sister, and my dad moved out mid-December from family issues. My biological mother turned out to be a really terrible person, and we made the choice to flee the house one night. On the night of my 14th birthday, leaving most of our stuff behind. I brought up my grandma at the start because she was the only one who ever really came to visit me after death. Yet I'm not sure she was behind the picture and the motion sensor scare. She was never the person that would really try to scare us. What I took from it is that it could have just been an omen, a jump into a new picture. After we left, my life did get better in certain ways. I don't know if it was her that night trying to tell me something or if it was something else. I still have no clue, but think of it often. I fully believe in the paranormal based on many other stories besides this one in my life. Funny thing is, I don't know how to be honest in debunking if nothing was broken. It's just a simple odd part of my life I won't forget. I miss my grandma every day. I don't get many signs of her like I once did, maybe every now and then. It makes me smile to know she's always with me, raising me through life. I plan on getting a tattoo in her dedication. Thank you for listening to my story. I wish I could understand what truly happened that night. The more I think about it, the more my kind grows. I have no physical explanation, and I really wish I did. I'm a 42-year-old man, and have always had a deep love for Christmas ever since I was able to know about it. Even when my parents told me the truth about it when I was 10, I was still left with a deep fondness for it. The story I'm about to share takes place in 1987 when I was 8. It was Christmas Eve, and like any other Christmas Eve, it was a cheerful night for children, because there was going to be a lot of presents under the tree the next morning. But as the saying goes, he sees you when you're sleeping. So in order to be able to open the gifts for the next morning, I would have to fall asleep. I remember watching TV in my room, one that I shared with my brother of 5 at the time. My other family, such as my mum, dad, older sister and grandma, who had come down from Wisconsin, were all downstairs. I think they were putting up the candy cane and ornaments. The reason they would do it on Christmas Eve is because me and my brother were clumsy for knocking over trees and leaving out our family to pick up the decorations, or sometimes sneaking to eat the candy canes. But I can't remember if they were doing that or just talking and watching television. Sometime in the night though, probably around 11 p.m, I fell asleep and awoke at 5 a.m. I woke up to footsteps and a bell jingling noise. I turned on my side facing towards my TV and our doorway, and I remember seeing the door creak open and a yellow-whitish man step in. And when I say yellowish, I mean his skin was glowing. As a kid, I was thrilled, because there was Santa sneaking into my room. But when I tried to jolt my body, I couldn't move a muscle. At this point, the Santa which was in my room was facing towards the TV, which was currently showing a Mickey Mouse Christmas special. And then I remember him turning his head to look straight at me. And when he saw me, it was like he came towards me, but I don't remember him actually walking towards me. Not as in levitating either. It's hard to explain. I remember him looking down at me with sparkling big eyes. He bent down and whispered something into my ear before vanishing. 41. After that I could move again, and when I got up, I saw something from my peripheral vision. And when I looked to the side of the window, I saw him in the distance. It was like he was riding on a sleigh, but he was far up in the sky. I ran down to find all types of presents under the tree, and at this time my little brother was up and had woken up my parents to tell him that Santa had come and had dropped off all the gifts. My parents came downstairs, and my grandmother already was downstairs because she was sleeping on a pull-out bed that was made from our couch. My sister, who was 12 at the time, had been awoken by my brother too. After opening up the presents, I remember telling my dad that Santa had stopped by and I had seen him just minutes before downstairs. I remember my dad asking me if the man came from the window, if he tried to take me with him, etc. But after denying all his questions and telling him about the whole story, including the part where I couldn't move, my dad brushed it off as a dream. And when I turned 11 and my parents told me the truth about Christmas, I remembered the incident from 3 years prior, but kind of brushed it off as a dream also, even though the thing had seemed so real. Well, fast forward to 2020. I'm 41 now, have a wife, 3 kids, 1 boy, 2 girls. It was Christmas Eve and me and the wife had laid down from an exhausting evening of wrapping gifts. Not having worked the next day or any other days until after New Year's, I knew I was going to sleep in that night until I was awoken by my 5-year-old daughter, as she had done previous years, since before she was able to talk and knew about Christmas. I remember checking to make sure my daughters were asleep before putting gifts under the tree. I knew my son was probably asleep too, as we have always told him since it was Christmas Eve that the day before Christmas there was probably going to be a lot of family over, and the next day too. Very short family though, since this time period was during quarantine still. I remember going to sleep around midnight and waking up at 4 a.m. The house was dark, and I could hear my wife sound asleep snoring next to me. I was in a bit of confusion because I rarely wake up through the middle of the night, unless I have to go to the restroom really badly or if someone wakes me up. But it seemed like the restroom part wasn't in this case the situation. Instead, I heard footsteps on the roof, and then seconds later, jingling bells. I tried to push my body up to get out and see who was there, and it was as if my son or maybe one of my daughters was opening up and grabbing their presents and walking back to the room. That's probably where the jingling sound came from, the box. As I laid in bed, with the door halfway open and laying on my back so my body was positioned towards the door, I heard the sound get closer, but as it did, I saw a glow in the hall. We had 2 night lights, but the color was like a yellowish light. I've had sleep paralysis before, but I just thought my body was too sore to even move. As the sound of bells kept reaching the door, I saw him. This time it freaked me out, unlike it had done decades ago when I first did. Everything was the same about him, the smile, everything. And the most terrifying thing again is the way he moved. I was still in shock. I wanted to go out into the hallway and confront this intruder or thing or whatever he was. But as I didn't see anything, I just heard footsteps on the roof again. And as I ran outside to look in the roof, I didn't see anything in the distance, but I saw an object in the sky, then flash, and then nothing. I was confused, heart racing, and knew that what I had seen years ago was not a dream now. I went back into the house. As I checked on my son's room and then my daughter's to make sure it wasn't any of them and had nothing to do with it, they were out cold asleep. When I went back into the room with my wife up now, she asked why I'm up so early. I tell her I couldn't sleep. And then goes on to say that she had a strange dream about a man in a red suit, dressed exactly like Santa, sitting down in our dining room kitchen drinking milk that her and our daughters had poured for Santa last night. She said that she couldn't see his face because in her dream he was facing away from her, but it was like a source of light in the dark, because after he left she woke up. After telling me this, something told me to go downstairs and check the dining room, and when I went, the milk that we had poured was halfway empty, and there were 2 cookies left on the plate, even though there were more the previous night. I thought that my wife was playing tricks with me, but after asking me, she swore that she hadn't. With these incidences, it was hard for me to fall back asleep that night. Good thing that my wife stayed up, since she knew that in about an hour, she was going to be jolted back up by one of our daughters yelling it's Christmas, so we just stayed up talking about things. I had yet to tell her, and even this Christmas I still hadn't. The only other person I told was my dad, since he was the one I first told this Santa event to. I asked him if he remembered the first one, and he said he did, and he remembered asking if there was a burglar who had tried to steal our presents. After telling my dad about the recent scene though, he had agreed that it was something paranormal or out of this world. It's crazy because this event happened when I was 41. I'm 42 now, and currently sharing this story on Wednesday, December 2nd, 2021. But this takes me way back to what Santa/the Thing said to me the first time it happened, if you recall. The number 41. I ask if anyone out there has had a similar experience. I'd love to hear it. And another thing I asked from Mr. St. Nick. It was nice meeting you, and I pray that it will be the last time.
Christmas morning. My mother was the most no-nonsense person ever, and did not believe in ghosts. She worked as a nurse in an ancient manor house that had been converted into a hospital. Her name was Sister McHugh, and it happened on Christmas Day, 45 years ago at a cottage hospital in England called Eccleston Hall Hospital. One Christmas morning, she parked her car out front and looked through the large bow window to see someone dressed up in Elizabethan clothes with food and decorations. She was thrilled that someone had gone to all that trouble and jumped into the room to say, "Merry Christmas!" There was no one there, just the office, files, and photocopier. She never said anything against ghosts after that. It is notable that my mother was one of those upright women who scoffed at the paranormal, but this incident really shook her.
Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed tonight's Christmas special. I hope you guys all have a very fun and festive Christmas this year, if you do indeed celebrate it. A huge thank you, of course, to my good friend Killer Orange Cat for joining me in tonight's video. It really means a lot, so thank you, buddy. If you enjoyed his narrations as well, you can check out more over on his channel, and he will be uploading a Christmas special too very soon, so keep an eye out. But for now, guys, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to my members and Patreons also, whose names can be seen on screen. You guys are amazing, thank you. And if you need more listening material, check out a link here to Killer Orange Cat or another video. But for now, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.